treated well by the custodial parent, and intermittently facing psychological and emotional abuse for wanting to love the targeted parent. These are the exact circumstances required for captured trauma bonding that you will most likely recognize as Stockholm Syndrome. To a disinterested, biased, or uneducated third party, trauma bonding to a pathogenic parent looks exactly like a loving relationship. But to someone who has experienced it, who is not biased, who is an interested party, and or who has been trained to watch for the splitting behavior that accompanies it, it becomes obvious that the bonding is an unhealthy attachment system, and the attachment system has been damaged. There are psychological fingerprints. It creates a cross-generational coalition and perverse triangle that Dr. Childress describes in far better detail than I. The children learn to treat the targeted parent as less than, and to seek to minimize or avoid having a relationship with that parent. The three characteristics for attachment-based parental alienation having been met are an unnatural break or damage to the attachment system between the children and the targeted parent. Linda Gottlieb, one of the experts on this topic, has studied thousands and thousands of children and has said that even the ones that have been badly abused still want to bond with that parent, unless there has been the minor situation of a foster parent trying to do the same thing to adopt that child. 2, a shared delusional belief. Sees one parent as all good and sees one parent as all bad. That's the delusion. The narcissistic behavior, at least towards the targeted parent, this causes the children prolonged and elevated stress whose psychological damage can be measured physically through the volume of different regions of the brain, like the hippocampus. The repercussions of this are well described in the ACE study that you will learn more about when Ira Scott speaks on it. But this is where the cycle repeats. From the child's perspective, this is child psychological abuse, suspected, confirmed, DSM-5 V995.51. However, from the pathogenic parent's perspective, this is nothing less than the psychological form of Munchausen by proxy, more formally known as factitious disorder imposed on another, 301.51. This is covert domestic violence by proxy of the children towards the ex-significant other based in mental illness, and it is rampant because it is supported by the greed, the apathy, and the ignorance of those within the system. Domestic violence may be physical, and that is well recognized, but it may also be covert, and that is poorly recognized. The United States Department of Justice, Office of Violence Against Women, on their website defines domestic violence as a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control power over another partner. In attachment-based parental alienation, triangulation of the children is used to accomplish this, since there is no longer a couple in a direct relationship. The U.S. Department of Justice goes on to provide examples of covert domestic violence, including emotional, economic, psychological actions or threats that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. They go on to specifically list damaging one's relationship with his or her children as emotional abuse, and forcing isolation from the family as psychological abuse. Let's be very clear. Child abuse is a form of domestic violence. Dr. Edward Kruk has defined parental alienation, which he has studied since before Dr. Gardner, and his speech in the Reykjavik Conference on Parental Alienation, before Dr. Childress identified it as attachment-based parental alienation as a form of child abuse in meeting the criteria of causing significant harm as a result of human action that is proximate and preventable. This emotional and psychological abuse of children has a physical component. It is in the prolonged exposure to stress hormones as their brains are forming that causes anatomical changes in the volumes that I mentioned before, particularly in the regions of the brain rich in glucocorticoid receptors. This is measurable. Dr. Owen Wolkowitz led the studies on this. They've been repeated. They are well supported within the literature. And this is the basis for the behaviors found in the ACE study if left untreated. These regions have been found in adulthood to be able to create new brain cells in the absence of neurotoxic levels of stress hormones. The judges, clerks, attorneys for the children, CPS, and other mental health professionals simply do not have the professional competence in the form of being able to identify personality disorders, complex trauma and grief, delusions, attachment system failures, and the psychoneuroendocrinology of hypercortisolism that drives this, nor do they care to because it is not in their best interests financially to do so. The targeted parents are left with the trauma and grief of losing and mourning their own children who are still alive with no recognition or support. They are further required to pay for the alternative housing, attorneys, child support, child care expenses, visitation, and possibly expert witnesses. This is expected while they attempt to mount a legal defense. In short, they are emotionally and psychologically, legally, and financially abused at the same time. And when they have a normal reaction to that abnormal situation, they are labeled as mentally unstable, in need of examination, and ultimately suffer from the Martha Mitchell effect. Now, Martha Mitchell publicly made the outlandish claims that there was illegal activity going on within the White House. She was contained. She was accused of being mentally ill. She was made to go through psychological evaluation. She was found by an expert to be delusional and was ignored. That was until the Watergate scandal broke into the public consciousness. And she was vindicated. Fighting Wetiko is the next thing we need to focus on. I draw upon a Cherokee story of an old Cherokee chief that was teaching his grandson about life. He said, "A fight is going on inside me. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, false doubt, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you and every other person too." The grandson asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" The old chief simply replied, "The one you feed." I believe that these two wolves have names. The evil one is hypercortisolism, and the good one is oxytocin. Each of us needs to fight Wetiko within ourselves before we can effectively fight this broken system. We need to commit to our own emotional health in exactly the same manner as the pre-flight safety training teaches you to put on your own mask first before putting on even your children's. We fight amongst ourselves, and Wetiko laughs because we have lost another battle and gave Wetiko more strength. We get distracted by other topics and agendas like gender, and Wetiko laughs. Domestic violence is gender neutral. It is not always overt, where there are compound fractures. In fact, it may be so very subtle that the abused may not even recognize that they are being abused because the covert abuse is so poorly understood, and that was my case. We fight the problem on many different fronts, but we are united in always fighting Wetiko. To the radical feminists, I support your right to your opinions, right up to the point where they become damaging to children, and that is where I draw the line. The radical feminist movement, with designs on keeping our children entirely to the women post-divorce, is de facto support for covert domestic violence by proxy of the children and harms them. Keeping strictly gender neutral in our speech and our actions limits their argument to only that of behaviors, which is an argument that they cannot win. I came here today to change our discussions in how we view and battle Wetiko, and to unite that view under the heading of domestic violence. None of the greedy, none of the ignorant, none of the apathetic wants to be associated with supporting domestic violence in any way, particularly elected officials. I came here to highlight the importance of healing our own emotional wounds despite being without our children in order to be effective in this fight. I came here to change the vocabulary that we use. When we speak in gender-neutral terms of unhealthy and healthy minds, targeted and pathogenic parents, we are focusing on the issues and behaviors and not being distracted by gender. Insisting on this from both ourselves and others eliminates radical feminism and male privilege from distracting our efforts at making positive changes. I came here to observe that pathogenic parents are broken and we cannot fix them. I came here to observe that for most of us, the marriage is irreparably broken and we cannot fix it. I came here to shine a bright spotlight on how the children and the targeted parent become broken. I came here to point a path towards the discussion of domestic violence because while we all know the court system is broken, the general public is not yet aware of it and we need their support. On good days, there are but 4 things that are within our control: what we choose to think about, what we choose to say or not say, what we choose to do or not do, and how we choose to feel. I choose to speak because silence is complicity, and I will not be complicit in this. I choose to speak because my children cannot. I choose to speak because I want a better future for them than this. I came here to point to the weakness in the system of laws that are supposed to be protecting the weakest among us and do not. I came here to incite a change to those laws. New York State does not have a clear, explicit definition under the legal definition of child abuse for covert domestic violence by proxy of the children towards the ex-significant other. And I don't believe that any other state does either. This needs to change, and this needs to change now. This is the one weak point. There is not a political animal that wants to be in opposition of a clear definition to protect children from domestic violence, regardless of their party. I cannot do this by myself, and I will call on all of the activists in their assistance to help get this done, and setting the example for everyone else. I have never done anything of this magnitude before, but together we can. Together we can put the same definition in place across all 50 states. Together we can give Dr. Childress a foundation to hammer against with his definition of attachment-based parental alienation. This is our children's civil rights movement. We are not the first to walk this path. We follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before us, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I will echo his famous speech that he made on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream. I have a dream that we will climb from the valleys of our depression and climb our mountains of despair by healing our own emotional wounds that we might be of service to others. I have a dream that our children will someday be recognized as people with the civil right to have both parents present and actively involved in their lives. I have a dream that this right shall not be denied or infringed upon by any level of government unless it can be factually demonstrated to the highest order that it would be truly harmful to them. I have a dream that we will stop fighting the enemy in a cold, snowy valley with snowballs against guns, and that we will stop getting slaughtered by trauma, depression, and suicide. I have a dream that we will rise up to the top of those snow-covered mountains, band together in desolation and despair, to work together in unity and send legislation down the sides of those mountains as massive boulders of snow that cannot be stopped. I have a dream that someday every person will recognize covert domestic violence when they see it, and will kill it with the bright light of exposure instead of the secrecy that it thrives in. On the family level, many of us are fighting the covert domestic violence by proxy of the children towards the targeted ex-significant other. We are also fighting the covert domestic violence by proxy of our children of the ex-significant others on the national level. It is not ISIS. It is not radical Islam. It is not North Korea. It is our own federal government, our own state governments, our own judges, our own CPS, who in their greed, their ignorance, and their apathy provide the de facto support for this covert domestic violence by proxy of our children on an unprecedented scale. I have a dream that you will join me in attacking the weakness in every state by getting legislation sponsored in every state and getting those bills passed that clearly identify the behaviors of parental gatekeeping as covert domestic violence by proxy of the children under the legal definition of child abuse without loopholes and with crystal clarity. I have a dream that someday I will see my children and that you will see yours too. Join me in making that happen. I have created a face group dedicated to this purpose. Scanning this QR code will bring you directly to the Facebook page that I have started to make this happen. It features my best and sadly poor attempt at graphic artistry that depicts an infographic map for what we face. It is a platform for New York and other activists to gather, gain the support of the public, hold legislators accountable, and move forward legislation that adds to the legal definition of child abuse. Specifically, covert domestic violence by proxy of the children towards a targeted parent or family member by the other parent or family member using coercive gatekeeping practices to control and interfere with the children's relationship of the targeted parent to foster the children's choice of relationship with the interfering parent over the targeted parent, and the child behaving in a manner consistent with splitting, where in the presence of both parents shows to a reasonable suspicion of evidence an elevated anxiety and shared delusional behavior with a strong preference towards the custodial parent that would otherwise look like a healthy parent-child bond despite the targeted parent wanting to have a relationship with their children, and in the absence of the targeted parent having been proven with clear and convincing evidence, not hearsay, to be abusive and or having an active substance abuse disorder, shall be considered as having met the standard for the reasonable suspicion of child abuse and the basis for a reversal of custody. I have informally started taking a survey of those who are between the ages of 15 and 25, and I've asked them, what percentage of your peers in high school would you say have a relationship with only one parent? I've gotten numbers back from between 10% and 70%. Most of those numbers being between 30 and 50%. Now, the next question I asked them, do you think that many parents are bad people? So bad they need to be kept from their children? Universally, that answer is no. I ask them how they feel about this. They say this is bad. They can't understand it. They can't quantify it. They just know there's something wrong, and they know that this is a growing problem and that this is being handed to them. I ask you to join me in doing something about this. Thank you.
Fantastic, Jimmy. Fantastic.
Thank you, James.
Well formulated, well expressed.